Welcome, everybody. I'm Aaron Grossman. I teach at Roygam Elementary. This is Marilyn Steffen. She teaches at Bud Beasley. This is another episode of Just Two Teachers in which we look at benchmark, advance, and how implementation is going for us and how we're going about our planning. So since this is Unit 5, we're looking at what is the value of innovation. And before we walk through our reactions and how we plan to elevate this unit and how we think things might go, we're going to start with hot tips. So Marilyn, what do you have for us?
Okay, so I took your pictorial supports that you did, which I absolutely love, probably my favorite thing, for the read alouds, and I incorporated them in a screencast while I'm reading aloud. It doesn't show me, it just shows the pictures. So I'm reading aloud the story with the pictorial support, and that is in case somebody is absent or if I want the kids to re-listen to the story, and it just gives me a different way to present this to the students rather than just me reading in front of the class. I feel like it could even be more support on a laptop if they can listen to the story and see the pictures close up. So that's one of my hot tips. And also to download that opinion bookmark if you haven't already. Mm-hmm. So this unit requires another opinion piece. So it could be a helpful tool.
And if you're wondering what Marilyn is referring to, so we have curated some of this content, most of which Marilyn has just made on her own. So the opinion bookmarks, those are in every grade level in the review and retune section. Similarly, I posted what's called a CERC poster, Claim, Evidence, Reasoning, and Closure. That's in the review and routines. The pictorial supports, which are built through Google Slide Decks. So those are open to anybody, again, curated by unit and then based on each read aloud selection. And we've built those kindergarten all the way through 5th grade now. And then finally, the screencast, you shared those over the weekend. So I've got those posted and linked as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to try those. And how about you? What's your hot tip?
I'm going to go back in time, and some of the people watching remember an educator named Liz Warner, and she used to always talk about the value of graphic organizers with an important qualifier, and that was, and again, this was more her philosophy than anything else, certainly not based on a lot of research, but her convention was, if we're going to share a graphic organizer with a child, we want it to be something they can quickly reproduce on their own. And so one of the frustrations I've heard is that within the e-text and benchmark advanced, these things extend about 35 pages, and printing those is challenging, getting them to format at the correct size is difficult. So I've just decided to go back to a Liz Warner suggestion. My kids get this, or something like it. And so I'm sharing how to build some of these graphic organizers, and if they're too elaborate, I just don't use them with my kids. Instead, right, I think these are things that, here's the Freyr model that appears several times within Benchmark Advance. It's one of those things where we've done it several times, the kids are just producing them. Similarly, here's a T-chart, so we can use a T-chart to show comparisons or similarities and differences. So the thought here, again, borrowing from a Liz Warner, which is great to have graphic organizers, especially helpful if there's something that's a tool to scaffold them in the text, and then ultimately they can use it when they get to a cold situation like SBAC or a map assessment.
Right. I think that is a super hot tip because you can't always be running copies or finding the right graphic organizer. So that's a really good tip.
Yes. And so did you have another hot tip for us?
All right. Read, draw, talk, and write. Because Aaron just mentioned that you can draw your own, all it is 4 rectangles. And this can be used for annotating. And I have to give credit for Stephanie Nestler and Jackie Royal for presenting this to the staff as another way that kids can annotate. Reading the text, sketching a picture. That's the read the text, draw a picture, then talk. You get 30 seconds to tell a partner what you've drawn. And then at the very end, after you've read paragraph after paragraph on the bottom, you take all of that information, looking at your sketches, and you make sure you can do a summary based on your pictures. And it's amazing what the kids remember based on their sketches. So better for comprehension.
Yeah, absolutely. And better for language acquisition. So that just immediately reminds me of something like Stronger and Clearer Each Time, in which there are multiple rehearsals before they're ultimately accountable for the learning itself. So Marilyn and I are going to change things up a little bit. This is a unit on innovation, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to iterate a little bit. And instead of describing how Unit 4 went for us, instead we thought about just how was our lit block looking. So can you guys outline in 60 or 90 seconds, day to day, what does your lit block look like?
Okay, so I have to say I'm whole group, but at several different places in the classroom. So it might be on the whiteboard or the smartboard or I'm writing on a whiteboard or we're doing charts, depending on if it's grammar, based on the mini lesson, I guess, and that's whole group. Then we kind of break away, and the students are able to, those that can do the work on their own are able to just move along based on the must-do, may-do list that I created in the morning. And everyone gets a copy of it, so they're kind of independent. They check it off when they're done. But I do have a table of kids that may need extra help, whether it be in writing, grammar, words, whatever it is. They just automatically come to the table. They might even bring a laptop over and sit next to me for help with the laptop. So how about you, Aaron? How do you run your block?
So I think it's pretty similar to what you're doing in your classroom. I do the 3 mini lessons. So we know that we're going to get to comprehension, we're going to address writing, and then ultimately some kind of word study or spelling, in some instances, vocabulary. And then having gotten my kids to a certain level of independence, I tag it an imperative 5, although sometimes there's not always 5 activities. And so that imperative 5, right? Here's one of the spelling worksheets that you're going to be responsible for. Here's a level reader and some questions to hold you accountable for you comprehending and actually do the reading itself. We understood what the writing goal was, so now we're going to do some of that writing, and then we may tease it off with something akin to a reader's workshop so that they've got 5 activities that they're responsible for. And during that time, and again, very similar to you, I know that there's some kids who aren't at an independent level, and it vacillates and it varies.
Right.
And so some kids, they just understand, I'll be at a certain part of the room, my room, it's called the easel, and they just come there, and that's when I provide the extra support for them. But largely speaking, it's whole group. So naturally, we're hopeful you found value in the hot tip and how we're addressing our lit block. And so now we're going to address this idea of what is the value of innovation and how we're going to get to that outcome in Unit 5. So what did you think of the unit itself?
It seems a lot more in depth with content. I like the content part of it a lot because in the last unit, I felt like there wasn't as much conversation that could be had as in this unit. With the kids and interest. I think they'll have interest a lot like the animal unit. They did have a lot of interest in that unit too. So, and I think bringing everything together that they've been learning and after just coming off practicing an opinion piece and now another one, but a little bit more complex, I think that'll be good. How about you?
So like you, there's lots of things I like here, including the fact that, right, there's big knowledge demands in this unit. And, I'll pause right there and just remind people, look at your text complexity rubrics at the beginning of each one of these weekly reads, either the extended reads or the short reads, because you're going to see over and over again that the knowledge demands are considerable. And we'll talk about opportunities to elevate and how we can sort of mitigate some of that challenge for our kids. So I really like that in this unit, which is it's going to demand a lot of knowledge, and then simultaneously it's going to build a lot of background knowledge for our kids. Selfishly, I'm somebody who's sort of a slave to syntax and the importance of using syntax in our classroom with some consistency. So it's really addressed here with coordinating conjunctions in week 1 and then subordinating conjunctions in week 2. So I'm excited that we're going to be using those 2 outcomes in this unit. I think note-taking is a really important disposition for our kids. And we'll talk about, again, opportunities to elevate that. And I also like the idea of there's a little bit of spaced learning here. So we're seeing some of the content and some of the outcomes we're addressing here in Unit 5 actually appeared first in Unit 3. So an opportunity not to actually allow ourselves to forget some of this stuff.
That's good.
Drawing from that evidence and some of that research from Dylan William on spaced learning. All right, so having reviewed kind of what we think of Unit 5 and the things that we like about it, obviously most people are here to watch how do we plan to elevate this unit and what resources are we putting online to support our classroom peers.
Okay, so I think this would be a perfect time to do digital citizenship. And I think Aaron will put all the links to everything I mentioned here on the website and maybe on the video. But commonsense.org has a great format for teaching digital citizenship. And so if kids are going to be using technology and just because that's their world, it's really important that they have those lessons for safety. Also a great time to do SEL lessons on growth mindset because innovators have a growth mindset and how did they come to be, knowing that failure is okay and how they came out in the end.
Right.
Kidsthinkdesign.org is a website that kids can go on and be designers, and it has little projects that they can do and then gives them an outside project that they could do also. You meet the designers that created this, and then it gives a little history on the designer and how they came to be. So it's like decorating, build a garden, all kinds of things like that. And then a really great resource to help students get ideas on what they could do is to watch videos on other children innovating. Kid innovators is what they're called. And that is on KNPB, on their PBS learning channel. And it's a really great resource for kids to see what other kids have done.
And I do love your take on this, because you're really thinking through the lens of how I'm going to blend this outcome, how I'm going to introduce sort of more technology to my kids, so that, right, there's something that sort of feels more visceral and real about we're reading about technology and how we iterate and improve things, and here we're going to do it in our classroom and how we're going to elevate our instruction. So very cool.
Thank you. Can't wait to hear yours.
So these things that I've put on the website, we put on the Facebook page so people know that they're coming. One of them is, I mentioned just a moment ago, when my kids complete one of the leveled readers, I've been putting the questions on stickers. So it's just one last step for me, so I don't have to go to those question cards for the kids. And then moreover, I don't want them to sort of painstakingly go through all of the questions. I think it's too much for them, and certainly too much for me to grade. So it's as simple as you peel one of these stickers off, put it on a piece of paper in a journal, and they're ready to go to answering the questions. So that's sort of my first tip, and that just sort of runs all the way through in all those leveled readers. The second one is in week 1, we introduced this idea of coordinating conjunctions and how we can produce compound sentences. And I'm such a firm believer in this idea of the more practice kids get practicing or writing with greater complexity, how that transfers to their own written work. And so these kind of serve two purposes. So these all begin with a STEM. In this case, this is Unit 5, Week 2. Edison was motivated to invent things because, and then they complete each one of these STEMs. And as a classroom teacher, I can quickly formatively assess whether they got the concept, and then more importantly, practice writing with conjunctions. Okay. And, you know, this one I know that we talked several times about, which is there enough in benchmark to get to the note-taking outcome? You know, I don't want to sell my kids short. I don't want to fall for having a fixed mindset about my own kids. I feel like I needed to frame it a little bit more for them. Instead of just take notes on a topic, I created this graphic organizer. And in each one of these, we'll kind of hold this up. You can see I've broken down 5 paragraphs for my students. So as they're collecting, in this case, details or evidence, they understand which question, and then they kind of understand, right, I'm going to start with an introduction, and then paragraph number 2 would then be about this research project I've selected. I'll identify what was invented and who invented it, and then in paragraph 3, I explain why it's important, and then ultimately how did this invention come to be. So kids understand very specifically what am I taking notes for, rather than very generally, I'm putting notes on a note card, and then I'm going to synthesize that information later.
I really love that you did that, and I'll tell you why. As soon as I saw it and I read through it, I thought I could have used this in the Cinderella writing, actually, because I feel like my kids started with their introduction. They gave a little bit of knowledge or a little bit of information, then they gave reasons, and then boom, no conclusion. Or stopped up or left a piece out. All these things, even though we'd gone over it, even though they had information written down, they had taken notes, it's almost like they left it out. So I love the boxes because I think it's going to guide them to what they're supposed to write, instead of just stopping when they get to how do you use it, and then they see that there's a box left that says conclusion. It's like, oops, right. I forgot my conclusion, because they didn't really see that they forgot it until we sat down and read it together. And then I would say, where's your conclusion? And they're like, oh. So I really think that that's going to be helpful. Very helpful.
And I know there's a certain sensitivity when we talk about testing, but when my first year back, which was in 15-16, I thought I'd done a reasonably good job teaching my kids to write. And as they were taking the assessment, I could just tell they weren't transferring. And so that's where that mnemonic I-CERT came from. I for an introduction, CERT for claim, evidence, reasoning, and then closure. And so quite literally in sort of cold situations, I asked my kids to write I-CERT at the top of their page and kind of check it off, to go to your point, which is that habit of just being, I think I'm done, and just stopping.
Yeah.
rather than reflecting on, did I end with some kind of closure or a closing statement or a conclusion, depending on what outcome you're reaching for in your classroom. This obviously scaffolds them into that. And so ultimately you just hope for habits of mind. They've done it enough throughout the course of the year. They understand it's called ICERC, and then they're just able to generalize to whatever situation, including a testing situation. So
Very good.
we've also, I don't want to sell us short. And, every once in a while, it's great when somebody from the community gives us something to post online. But we've gone so far with Just Do Teachers now, where Marilyn mentioned that she's now creating screen flows to match the pictorial Google slide decks. We have a number of these because button sews. I love the bookmarks that you've been creating. So first there was opinion, now most recently narrative, and I know that we have informative that we're going to be posting in the next few days. So there's a lot for you to use, and our commitment is to keep that open and free for everyone until either people stop visiting or we just get completely gassed. So I guess we've said it several times. Please continue to visit justdoteachers.com. Follow us on Twitter. Come to our Facebook page. I think both of us are a bit surprised by the number of people who are currently in our group. And that's been a lot of fun. And I think people are becoming increasingly less inhibited about sharing some content with us. So with that, thank you very much, Marilyn.
Thank you, Aaron.
And good luck to everybody. Happy holiday, and we'll see you in 2020.